Oh, nostalgia. It's one of the most interesting parts of the human experience. I think most of us who feel it always think back to a time where life was simpler. More often than not, this is childhood, but it can also be more complex. It can be a warm feeling, pleasant ache, maybe a bittersweet longing, a sentimental yearning, a mix of happiness and gentle sadness, or a sense of comfort and loss. For a nerd like me who played a lot of video games growing up, this complex human experience is how I feel whenever I get to boot up the old Game Boy Advance and play Megaman Zero. But today's video is not about the game, but a tribute to the titular character himself in model kit form. Because I'm also a Plamo nerd and a model kit enjoyer. Let's build the legendary hero and Maverick hunter awakened from his long sleep. Hello again, friends, fellow modelers, and hobby enthusiasts. Welcome back to another full build video, where I'll show you all how I build a model kit from start to finish with some explanation of the various steps. In this video, I'll be showing the work I did on the Megaman Zero model kit produced by Eastern Model in collab with Capcom. One of the two that they produce for this collab. The other being the Copy X. This was sitting in my backlog for quite a bit and I really enjoyed working on it. If this is your first time watching my channel, welcome. I'll do my best to explain the different processes as we go along. So, sit back, pour yourself a nice drink, and let's build the legendary...
Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
Zero. Straight away, this has one of the most premium feeling packagings I've ever seen so far in a model kit. The box is bright and glossy with some beautiful art and studio photos of the assembled model on the sides. The cardboard is also colored in this deep black, which is my first time seeing it. Inside, we have the bags of runners with the assembly for Zero and all the accessories, which are plentiful. Included, we get quite a few of his signature weapons, as well as some of the effects parts for the green energy beams of the weapons. Also included are parts for nice adjustable display stand, both pre-painted and unpainted faces, pre-painted hands, and something you don't see too often, LED units for the sword, spear, and the head. First things first, let's get all the runners out of these bags and organize them. Let's also check all the parts and make sure everything's accounted for. Checking the manual, everything is indeed accounted for. One thing I have to mention, the model I got had some minor damage from shipping, but this was only on one of the green effect parts. It broke off the runner, leaving a little gouge, but it's fixable, and not that big of a deal. The batteries for the LEDs aren't looking too good either, some swelling and calcium buildup, but I can get replacements easily, no big deal. With everything seemingly accounted for, I organize all the runners in alphabetical order, separate the special loose pieces like the faces, hands, LEDs, stickers, and water slide decals in a separate bin to the side. According to the manual, most of this kit is ABS plastic, so I'll need to take care later when painting. ABS can have a tendency to become brittle if exposed to certain thinners. So, after giving the manual a quick study, I sort the runners into these metal IKEA Barriera pot lid holders, also utilizing the kit's box as well to keep things organized. It helps to keep things sorted in a way that makes sense for comfortable assembly and prep work. I personally recommend having something like these loose containers for sorting parts for these initial steps, as it makes finding things way easier and keeps me from losing parts as I prepare the kit. Anyways, with the manual flipped to the first step, let's follow along and remove the parts as needed. The way I usually like to do all my prep work is in one operation at a time. I remove all the parts in one go essentially, but keep it sorted to the steps outlined in the manual. So for example, if the first step is all the head parts, I'll cut all those out first and keep them together. It helps to have some kind of small trays or bins handy. In this first run, I'm just cutting them off the sprue with my Tamiya sharp pointed side cutter, but leaving a small amount of excess plastic behind and not cutting up right against the part. This avoids accidentally gouging the surface if cutting too close, or if you're not planning on painting your kits, cutting too close may cause annoying stress marks. I repeat this with every single step until all my parts are off the runners and sorted into bins. Once I have all my parts ready, I'll now go through each bin and each individual part once more, but this time trimming away the excess plastic flush against the part with my God Hand single-bladed nipper. Using the single-bladed nipper gives a really clean final cut and makes it much easier to sand down. After going through each part again with the God Hands, it's time to fully remove the gate marks, which is a pretty straightforward process if you built any plastic model kits on sprues before. There are many different sanding tools and methods out there, and you can really just use what you're comfortable with. I'll try to keep things simple and not overcomplicate this step. I like God Hand files and sponges, so that's what I'll use. You can see a more in-depth guide in this tutorial video. The process is usually like this. there's still a lot of excess plastic on the surface. You can go in with a hobby knife to first kind of chisel away at it to get closer to flush. Afterwards, I'll usually start sanding it down with around 400 to 600 grit, and then up to 800 to 1000, and that's usually good enough. You can always polish it up to much higher grits if you want a very glossy surface, but around 800 to 1000 is smooth enough since I'm going to be painting this model, and those scratches from sanding will vanish after painting. It also helps to have some kind of fine brush or toothbrush to make sure dust is cleaned off your parts as you're building. On that same note, I've taken a liking to using electronics cleaning gel to keep my parts and sanding sponges clean. You can just dab it against the gel and it removes most debris. It also doesn't leave any residue. Very handy for keeping tools, parts, and the work area clean and dust free. Now, there are a lot of parts, with a lot of gate marks, so this took a while. It helps to throw on some music, maybe a TV show or a podcast in the background if you decide to work in this way. Most people hate this stage of building models because it can feel quite repetitive, but I find it quite relaxing once I find my groove, and before you know it, you'll be done. Having the parts broken down step by step makes it easier to check your progress and makes this whole process less of a Herculean task. Also, as far as the face parts and hands, those are loose and don't really have much surface defects, so I just left them as is for now. I'd also like to note, for clear parts like the green beam effects and display stand, you can polish the gate marks up to much higher grits to help make those disappear more. I like to use 3-step nail buffing sticks for clear parts specifically, as you can get a nice shine if you put enough elbow grease into it. After a few hours, I eventually got the kit all cleaned up. The next step was to see how everything fits together. I always recommend giving your model kit a test assembly if you can before deciding to paint. It will inform you of any other sticking points that may interfere with your final finish. Addressing issues early on is a lot easier than finding out later. Overall, the kit is really quite nice. Lots of options for displaying him with all the included accessories. The only issues I'll have to fix are seam lines and the hair parts, which I can do later. And the other issue is that none of the LED batteries are usable. Some are swollen and calcified, so I ordered some new batteries which I'll install later in the final assembly after I paint. Here's how it looks assembled straight out of the box with the gate marks cleaned. At this stage, I have a pretty good idea of how the kit comes together, and any potential issues I might run into later, so I'll disassemble the kit now into sub-assemblies that make sense to me, and get everything ready for painting. When disassembling, you can follow the manual backwards and just be really careful and slow. It helps to have a part separator tool like I have to help avoid damaging any parts. Similar tools are used for disassembling electronics, but it's always good to be patient and pry parts open slowly. Most parts are then placed on these metal alligator clip sticks. I bought these in packs on Amazon, but you can use the wood variant as well. You can even make your own with bamboo skewers and alligator test clips easily. Any parts that don't have graspable areas, I'll have to get creative with double-sided tape, various wood sticks or popsicle sticks, or even poster putty. Rule of thumb is just to have the part mounted on an area that isn't visible after painting and final assembly. Usually this is where pegs are inserted or undersides of parts. Figuring this out is why familiarizing yourself with a kit is more important with a test assembly, or just by studying the manual intuitively. After some careful planning, you'll end up with something like this, and all parts can now be easily handled for spray painting or airbrushing. To hold all my parts, I use a polyethylene packing foam slab as a tray to plant my painting skewers into. You can also use cat scratchers and other dense foams too for the same thing. This is just what I have on hand and works for me. It's stable, and my parts won't shift around or fall off when I'm handling them. Some of you may be asking, why didn't I wash the parts before getting ready to paint? These parts I feel didn't really need them. I didn't handle them within my bare hands too often, so not much oil or sweat from my hands is getting on the plastic. They also don't seem to have much mold release agent or any kind of grease to them, and I also did quite a bit of sanding across the surfaces, so it should be fine. The paint I'm going to be using is predominantly lacquer and solvent based, so the chemical adhesion is pretty strong. I'm not too worried about any contamination, and the sanded surface will help adhesion even more. Let's gear up with gloves and respirator and fire up the spray booth. To make things simpler, I'm not going to read the full manufacturer names and number code of each paint, but I'll name the color and have the full name displayed on the screen if you'd like to find the same or similar colors. I'll also list all the colors in the description. Most of my paints I thin in advance and transfer to squeeze bottles along with the original label. I'll make a tutorial for this process in the future. This is easier for me to just pour and shoot into my airbrush, as I don't paint by hand with lacquer at all. I'd also like to mention that I don't really change my air pressure either that often. I'm roughly around 18 to 20 psi at all times. What I do control a lot is my paint thinning and how much and how far I'm spraying, which I think is more important to focus on. The airbrush I'm using is my GSI Crayo's Mr. Hobby Pro Convoy PS266 with a 0.5mm needle and nozzle. Starting off with the gray parts, I went ahead and airbrushed a gloss black from Tamiya. This is TS14 black that is decanted from a spray can. I'm skipping primer in an effort to keep the paint layers thin, and most of these parts shouldn't get too much friction. I'm also not too worried about paint rubbing off, and this is a lacquer paint, so that should have some good adhesion. I'll take the risk. The glossy black is also great base if you are planning on spraying shiny metallic finishes. I make sure to always start with a thin coat first, flash the part with just air, then do heavier wet coats to leave a nice glossy base. I repeat this over all the gray parts, then move on to another color while letting those dry. Now for the white armor parts, I also skipped primer and surfacer. I sprayed Gaia Notes Natural Brown as a shadow color and a base, as I want a warmer color for shading. I'll return later with white to finish this off. Moving on now to the dark purple parts, I wanted to change the tone a bit, while keeping the spirit of the same color scheme. For now, I base coated all the purple with Mr. Color Titan's Blue 2, which is closer to a navy blue, but perfect for a shadow color for what I'll be using to highlight this with. Again, also skipping the primer / surfacer. For the yellow parts, I did use a primer, Mr. Surfacer 1500 Pink. Sounds fancy, but the 1500 number is just the fine grit of the finish. Think of a 1500 grit sandpaper. In other words, it's pretty smooth. The pink color also gives the next layer of yellow paint I'll be layering over more vibrance. If you've never tried a pink surfacer, try it. Guarantee it will enhance the vibrance and saturation of any warm colors you spray over it. Continuing with primer colors, I decided that for the red parts, I want a more shadowy color for the edges and recesses, but something that still complements the red. So I went with Mr. Mahogany Surfacer 1000. This chocolate brown color, I'm confident will be a great shadow color for the subsequent red layer. Yes, it's a lower number than 1500, but still looks smooth and covers and fills the micro scratches from that 800 to 1000 grit sanding sponge really nicely. Now that we have all our base colors established across the parts, it's time to go back to the first part I sprayed and start layering down the final colors and highlights. The beauty of working with lacquer paints is that when sprayed correctly, they dry to a workable finish within an hour, and I can start spraying over them. So returning to the now glossy black parts, I begin spraying Gaia Dark Stainless Silver as the color for some select pieces of the originally gray parts. These are mostly some of the trim of the armor, smaller details, and also the handle of the gun, mostly serving as an accent color to break up some of the gray. For the rest of the glossy black parts, I sprayed Alclad 2 Steel, which is a slightly grainy but nice dark steel tone. This is similar to what some would call gunmetal, but it's not as glossy as other dark steel tones. This is one of my favorites for inner frame colors and mechanical details, especially on gunpla kits. Coming back to the now pink yellow parts, I sprayed Nazca Mandarin Yellow for the main color. The pink really boosts the saturation and makes the color lean more towards orange, which is what I was going for. I'm not too crazy about the lemon leaning yellows, that's just my preference. Now, it's time to highlight colors to reveal some shading. I call this technique of shading post-highlighting. It's also a lot more forgiving than other techniques like pre-shading and post-shading. Allow me to explain. We'll start with the white parts. Since the white parts were previously base coated with a natural brown, which almost reads like a red-brown kind of oxide color, this will give the shading of the white a warm, almost pinkish hue. To achieve this, I start by spraying Gaia Ultimate White from the center, slowly working my way outwards, gradually building up the white in the large center areas, but leaving some of the darker color in the edges. I'm barely pulling back the trigger, but it's full air, so completely pressed down at all times. You have to be really careful not to pull back the trigger too much, as you can flood the piece with paint and ruin it. Go carefully and be really conservative with your trigger finger. Anyways, once I have all the centers opaquely layered, I can control how stark the shadows appear in the edges by spraying big passes from much farther distance away, gradually bringing down the intensity of the shadow. This is essentially the blending step. Basically, the more layers you add, the more muted and blended those dark edges will become. Do this enough times and it will eventually disappear completely. It just takes some practice, but anyone can do it with enough patience. And between passes, I check the piece and repeat this until the shadows are blended to the desired level of subtlety. This is up to the modeler as to how dark they want their shading to appear. I like just enough so that it's not too shadowy, but has enough to give some visual flair. The key is to keep the airbrush moving and not be too heavy-handed with how much paint you're releasing when you're closer to the part. With all the white parts finished in this way, I moved on to the next set, the purple that I previously painted in Titan's Blue 2. For the main highlight color, I mixed a custom lavender purple using 3 of my pre-mixed colors, Tamiya X16 Purple, X2 White, and XF7 Flat Red. I did this all by eye by pouring directly into another empty squeeze bottle, making sure to drop a few glass beads before capping and closing the bottle, and then blending well with my vortex mixer. I then labeled this nice light purple color Zero Lavender, my label maker. I don't have an exact ratio for how I got this color, as I did it all by eye, but I reckon that it's most likely something around 80% purple, 15% white, and 5% red, but your mileage may vary. You can also probably just find a similar lavender colored lacquer paint already available out there, but I just didn't have any on hand at the time, so yeah, it's also just fun to mix colors. The same method that I did for the white parts is repeated to these purple parts. Spray the lighter lavender color gradually, working in from the center, leaving some Titan's blue too poking at the edges. Then blend by spraying further away with more paint from farther away to blend the darker edges and recesses in. The blending step is necessary to create a smooth transition between the two colors, or otherwise I find that it looks too shadowy for my taste. The same process is now repeated to, you guessed it, the red armor parts, previously primed with that mahogany primer. For the highlight color, I sprayed Nazca Flame Red, and then blended the edges in by spraying farther away as usual. I really like the way the brown complemented the red. It gives it more depth to the red color without making it too shadowy, as opposed to if I just use pure black. The kit is now mostly painted. I left the parts to dry while I worked on addressing some of the other issues. Let's move back to the workbench. 4 different options for faces are included with Zero. 2 are already pre-painted, pre-decaled, and pre-top coated from the looks of it, so I'll be focusing mostly on the 2 unpainted faces. One face has a closed mouth, the other is open. You get a small sheet of water slide decals for the different eye options. For the closed mouth, I decided to pair it with the closed eyes. For the open mouth, I chose the eyes that have Zero looking slightly to his left. Water slide decals are very straightforward to apply. Cut the chosen decals out with a hobby knife, and then, using tweezers, carefully transfer them to water to allow the moisture to begin releasing the printed decal film from the paper. I just laid the cut decals out on a wet sponge in a plastic case, kind of like a wet palette, and then carefully picked up the decal with tweezers. Dabbed the underside of the decal onto the moistened applicator brush of Mr. Marksetter, which is a type of decal adhesive solution, and then placed the decals into the correct positioning. Excess moisture is then carefully pressed out and rolled away with a dry cotton swab. The open mouth of the unpainted face needs some painting as well for the inside of the mouth and teeth. So for this, I used some acrylic colors that are close to the other pre-painted face. For the teeth, I used Vallejo model color Cold White, and the tongue is painted in with Citadel Pink Horror. With a small brush and some patience, it wasn't too difficult to paint in neatly. I decided as a small finishing touch on the faces to shade in the parting of the lips with Citadel Seraphim Sepia to help add just a small bit of definition to the expression of the faces. Any excess wash that pulled up is cleaned off by just gently scraping away with a toothpick once dried. To make sure the eye decals are nicely adhered, I applied a layer of Mr. Mark Softer to help the decals melt and conform a little more for good measure, but they probably didn't need any. All the faces are then mounted to alligator clip sticks and then left to fully air dry while I went to address the next issue. Oh, it was now time to tackle what I'd been dreading to do. Not because it's particularly hard, just a bit of tedium. The 2 hair options, Big Poofy Ponytail and Slim Ponytail, are made up of a few parts and, as a consequence, have some seam lines running through where those parts join. And some of the gaps are quite large. To make this simple, I just assembled the hair parts and then applied extra thin super glue to the gaps to fix everything into place. Once dried, I gave the hair assemblies a good sanding and then brushed them clean. The larger gaps that remained are filled with Maverick's UV putty and then cured with a USB powered UV lamp. These are then sanded down once more. For any of the remaining gaps, I spot filled them with Madworks black CA glue applied with a toothpick, and then speed cured them with BSI accelerator, and once again, sanded smooth. But this time, much easier to identify because of the black CA glue. This process had to be repeated a couple of times, but eventually, all the gaps were seemingly eliminated. Again, not a difficult process, but it can be quite tedious as the shape of the hair isn't the easiest thing to sand, and I had to cut pieces of sandpaper and sponges pretty small to reach some areas. With the hair seam lines addressed, these parts had their connection pegs attached and then mounted to alligator clip sticks. These are ready to get painted, finally. The next order of business was how to deal with the clear green parts on the arms. I decided to mask the outside by turning the parts upside down onto poster putty. This will allow me to paint the inside of these parts with a special effect paint. Earlier, when I was test fitting the model before painting, I also broke one of the outer edges of the display base. I was able to repair it with some sanding and super glue, but we'll never be able to hide the damage completely without painting it, so I'll be painting all these clear black edge parts at the display stand. With all these issues addressed, Let's head back to the spray booth and do some more painting. The clear green arm parts that I had masked off earlier are sprayed with Alclad Holomatic Spectral Chrome, which is a cool holographic sparkle to the finish. Hopefully it can be seen through the clear green when I remove the poster putty later on. Moving back to the faces, I went ahead and sealed these in with a top coat, Mr. Color GX UV Cut Clear Flat. These will give them all the same finish, although I will say the pre-painted faces have a duller color to the eyes, and it's not the biggest deal for me though. Now, we can finish the hair parts. I started by laying down a gray primer over the hair, Mr. Surfacer 500. This is mainly to help me see if my seam line removal went well. Everything turned out great, and no more issues with seam lines. While I had the Mr. Surfacer 500 out, I also sprayed this over the clear black display stand parts, as these will be getting a different color. It's also to check my repair work on the one broken piece, to help give some of the clear parts a nicer shine, and also to hide some of the micro scratches from buffing away the gate marks. I sprayed a clear gloss over the clear green effect parts and on the clear red display stand parts, Gaia Notes Clear Gloss. Returning to the hair, I went over the pieces with Gaia Notes Natural Brown for the shadow color. I'll come back to highlight this just like the other steps. For now, let the brown dry and switch colors and finish the outer frame parts of the display stand with Alclad 2 Steel. The metallic frame of the display stand looks much nicer than the original clear black in my opinion. Let's finish off the hair parts now. For the main highlight color, I sprayed Nazca Mandarin Orange, focusing on the wide areas and avoiding the recessed partings and edges of the hair strands. This color I feel is more in line with how Zero's hair looks in the Mega Man X games. I've decided that, at this point, that's enough airbrushing. Let's head back over to the bench and add the final details. To help give more depth to the model, of course, we had to paint in the panel lines. I went with Mr. Weathering Color Multi-Black, which is an oil-based paint. Now normally I would add a gloss coat to the whole kit to protect the paint layer before panel lining, but we're not using enamel, and I want some of the oil-based paint to filter some of the different panels with some staining. Oil paint also has some longer working time before it fully dries, so it should be fine. This was pretty straightforward as there aren't too many panel lines. I just shake up the bottle before using it to make sure it's well blended, and after transferring it to a small dish, I load up a small pointy brush and just touch it to each panel line and recess I want to fill in. Capillary action will allow that thin paint to flow in through the recesses. Then the paint should be left for about an hour to dry. You don't want to clean up the excess while it's still wet as it will wick away the paint you just applied. Give it some time. I come back later with lighter fluid and cotton swabs to clean up any of the excess. It doesn't take too much, and you don't need to saturate the cotton swab with too much lighter fluid. Lighter fluid cleans up oil and enamels nicely, and it's not as harsh on plastic and won't react with lacquer paints. I will say, it's always good to test on some scrap if you're not sure. After finishing all the panel lines, all that's left is a few finishing touches. Instead of using the included stickers, I'll be painting in the finer details by hand with water-based acrylics. All I needed was a fine pointed brush, a cup of water, paper towel, and a well palette. Let me run you through what I used. Citadel Dawnstone was used to paint the vent details on the purple head part. I also used this on the trim of the waist, but I did it when I thought the camera was rolling and it wasn't, sorry. Citadel Abaddon Black was used to fill in the vent hole details that the panel lining stage couldn't fully cover. For the bright yellow bits around the body section, I used Citadel Aerial Yellow, which looks far better than the stickers in my opinion. Citadel Slanesh Gray, just kind of a muted, almost pastel purple, is used to paint the eyes on the mechanical frame option of the face. There weren't any stickers provided for this detail, FYI. Citadel Moot Green was used to paint the recessed bits on the front of the shield. There wasn't anything telling me to paint these green, I just thought it would look cool. They almost look like indicator lights when the beam shield kicks on. Finally, Citadel Runefang Steel was used to repaint some of the vent details on the purple that I previously painted gray. I ended up changing my mind on some of the gray and just layered over it with this color. I also used this in some of the details on the visible inner frame parts just to add some contrast. With that step done, that concludes the painting work. Some of you may be asking, why don't you top coat everything, like maybe a flat clear or gloss clear on all the parts? The short answer is, I like the finish on all the pieces as is. Not every model needs another clear coat, and I also don't want to add any more unnecessary friction to some of the moving parts, so I'm calling it here. Let's remove all the parts off the clips, poster putty, and tape, and assemble Zero. If you watched the entire video up to this point, I want to say thank you for hanging out and watching. This hobby is meant to be shared, and I'm always looking to do just that, even if it's just a little snapshot of my building and painting process. Whether you're an experienced modeler or a complete beginner, or just want to live vicariously through my process, hopefully you've gotten something out of watching this, even if it's just a little entertainment. If you're interested in more videos like this, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the notification bell for future updates. I've been Fritz, the Plamomancer. Remember to stay safe, be nice to each other, build stuff, paint stuff, and I'll see you in the next video. Here's Zero.